I was 68 years old when my own son told me, "Don't bother coming for Christmas." The words cut deeper than any winter chill. But what he didn't know, I held a secret, one that would turn his world upside down. This isn't just a story about family betrayal. It's about the power of a mother's quiet revenge. The phone rang on a snowy December evening. I recognized the number, my son, David. My hands trembled as I answered, expecting holiday plans. Instead, his voice was cold. "Mom, don't come this Christmas. It's just easy that way." The silence after hung like a slap. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. For years, I'd ignored the signs. The rushed calls, the empty promises, the way his wife, Lisa, barely hid her disdain. But this was different. I glanced at the folder on my kitchen table, the one with the mortgage papers. David's house, the one he bragged about, the one he thought was his? It wasn't, and he was about to find out. I sat there in my quiet living room, the hum of the heater, the only sound breaking the silence. The folder on the table seemed to stare back at me, its contents holding the power to change everything. I reached for it slowly, my fingers tracing the edges of the papers inside. The mortgage agreement, the deed, the payment receipts, all with my name on them, not David's. He had no idea. None at all. It all started 5 years ago when David and Lisa had first moved into that house. They were so proud, so excited to finally own their dream home. But the bank had rejected their loan application. David's credit score wasn't good enough, and Lisa's part-time job didn't meet the income requirements. I still remember the way David's voice cracked when he called me that night. "Mom, we're going to lose it. The sellers won't wait, and we don't have the down payment." What was I supposed to do? Let my only son lose his chance at happiness? So I stepped in. I used my retirement savings to cover the down payment, and because the bank trusted my financial history, I took the mortgage in my name. David and Lisa would make the monthly payments to me, and I'd handle the bank. It was supposed to be temporary, just until David's credit improved. But months turned into years, and somehow they never got around to refinancing. And now they had the nerve to tell me I wasn't welcome in my own house for Christmas. I took a deep breath and flipped through the payment records. At first, the deposits came like clockwork. But over the last year, they'd become irregular, sometimes late, sometimes short. I let it slide because, well, that's what mothers do. But now I wondered if they'd even noticed. Did they think the bank just stopped asking for money? Or did they assume I'd keep covering for them forever? A knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, stood there with a plate of cookies. "I figured you could use some company," she said, eyeing the folder on my table. I hesitated, then invited her in. She'd been a friend for years. If anyone would understand, it was her. I didn't mean to spill everything, but the words tumbled out. The phone call, the years of financial help, the betrayal. Mrs. Thompson listened quietly, then leaned forward. "Martha, you know what this means, don't you?" I shook my head. "That house is legally yours. If they stop paying, you have every right to take action." I hadn't considered that. Not really. But as I sat there, the weight of her words settled over me. David had made his choice. And now I had mine. Christmas was 2 weeks away, and the festive decorations around town only made the bitterness in my heart grow heavier. Every twinkling light, every cheerful carol felt like a mockery of what should have been a season of family warmth. I spent the next few days in a strange state of numbness, going through the motions of my daily routine while my mind churned with possibilities. The paperwork sat untouched on my kitchen table, but its presence loomed over everything. I had the power to upend David's entire life with a single phone call to the bank, yet part of me still hesitated. He was my son after all, the little boy I'd rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose dreams I'd nurtured. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who couldn't spare a chair for his own mother at Christmas dinner. The breaking point came unexpectedly. On my weekly grocery run, I bumped into Lisa's mother, Carol, at the supermarket. She gave me that tight-lipped smile she always did, the one that never reached her eyes. "Martha," she said in that saccharine voice, "David tells me you'll be having a quiet Christmas this year." The way she emphasized quiet made my fingers tighten around the shopping cart. Before I could respond, she continued, "Such a shame, but you know how it is with young families. They need their own space, their own traditions." Her words dripped with satisfaction, as if she personally orchestrated my exile. That evening, I made 2 important discoveries. First, while reviewing the payment records more carefully, I noticed something disturbing. The deposits had stopped completely 3 months ago. Not just late, non-existent. Second, and far more damning, was the email that popped up on my tablet. David had accidentally CC'd me on a message to Lisa. He still used the old family email account I'd set up for him years ago. The subject line, Mom's Christmas gift. My breath caught as I read his words. Let's just get her a gift card this year. She won't care, and we can put the extra money toward new patio furniture. The casual cruelty of it stunned me, not just the dismissal of my feelings, but the blatant lie. They weren't struggling financially. They were planning luxury purchases while deliberately cutting me out of their lives and neglecting their obligations. That's when I realized this wasn't just about Christmas. This was about respect, about basic human decency. Armed with this new information, I visited the bank the next morning. Mr. Wilkins, the loan officer who had handled my mortgage for years, listened patiently as I explained the situation. His expression grew increasingly troubled as I spoke. Mrs. Henderson, he said slowly, technically, you're well within your rights to initiate foreclosure proceedings given the payment default. But are you sure you want to go that route? This is your family we're talking about. I looked him straight in the eye. Family doesn't treat each other this way. Harold, they've had 5 years to make this right. The words came out steadier than I felt. Mr. Wilkins nodded solemnly and began typing. I'll need to send formal notices first. They'll have 30 days to respond before any further action is taken. As I signed the documents, my hand didn't shake. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of calm. The real twist came that night. As I was preparing dinner, my phone rang. It was David. My heart pounded as I answered, wondering if somehow he already knew. Mom, he said, his voice uncharacteristically warm. Lisa and I were thinking, maybe you could come for Christmas after all. The sudden change in tone set off every alarm bell in my mind. Before I could respond, he continued, we've been talking, and we realized we've been, well, not as welcoming as we should be. Every instinct told me this wasn't genuine. The timing was too perfect, the reversal too abrupt. I played along, agreeing to come, listening as he described their plans for the holiday, only when he casually mentioned, oh, by the way, we got some weird letter from the bank today. Probably nothing, but did you hear anything about the mortgage? Did the pieces click into place? They hadn't had a change of heart. They received the default notice and were scrambling. The invitation wasn't reconciliation. It was damage control. As I hung up the phone, a cold realization settled over me. The son I raised would try to manipulate me rather than simply do the right thing. The game had changed, and I would be ready. The days following David's sudden invitation passed in a surreal haze. Every time I replayed our conversation in my mind, new layers of deception revealed themselves. That false warmth in his voice, the overly detailed descriptions of their holiday menu, the way he'd rushed off the phone when I asked about the bank notice, it all painted a picture of desperation rather than genuine remorse. I found myself staring at my reflection in the bedroom mirror one morning, tracing the lines of age that framed my face, wondering when I become someone my own son felt he could manipulate. The woman looking back at me had tears in her eyes but steel in her spine. I made a decision then. I would go to their Christmas dinner, but not as the meek, forgiving mother they expected. Preparations became my therapy. I visited a boutique downtown and bought a new dress, deep red like warning lights, with a cut that made me stand taller. My hairdresser, Janice, who'd been trimming my silver curls for 15 years, gasped when I told her I wanted something different. By the time she finished, my hair framed my face in sharp, modern angles that made me look every bit the formidable woman I needed to be. Going somewhere special? Janice asked as she brushed stray hairs from my shoulders. A family gathering. I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The morning of Christmas Eve brought an unexpected development. A certified letter arrived from David's attorney, not addressed to me, but mistakenly delivered to my mailbox instead of his. The return address label had been printed incorrectly. As I held the envelope, I debated whether to return it unopened, but the weight of recent betrayals made my fingers tremble as I slid a letter opener beneath the flap. The contents turned my blood to ice. David wasn't just trying to sweet-talk me. He was preparing legal action to contest the house ownership, claiming verbal agreements and elder financial abuse. The document included printouts of our text messages, carefully selected to paint me as overbearing and confused. Worst of all was the attached email between David and Lisa. If we can prove Mom's mentally unfit, we might not have to pay her back at all. I sat at my kitchen table for hours, the legal papers spread before me like some grotesque holiday centerpiece. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the minutes with deafening regularity. Outside, children laughed as they played in the snow, their joy a stark contrast to the devastation unfolding inside me. With methodical precision, I made copies of every document, then carefully resealed the originals in a new envelope to accidentally leave at David's house. Let him wonder how much I knew. Christmas Day dawned bitterly cold, the kind of dry chill that seeps into bones and lingers. I dressed carefully. The red dress, my mother's pearls, the leather portfolio containing every mortgage document, payment record, and now the attorney's letter. As I applied my lipstick, a shade darker than usual, I practiced my smile in the mirror, not the warm, crinkly-eyed expression I'd worn for decades of family photos, but something cooler, more calculated. The face of a woman who could walk into battle with her heart breaking and still emerge victorious. The drive to David's house, my house, felt both interminable and over too quickly. Their neighborhood glittered with festive excess. Inflatable snowmen, synchronized light displays, wreaths on every door. David and Lisa had outdone themselves this year. Their roof lined with twinkling icicle lights, the porch railings wrapped in garland. Through the front window, I could see the glow of their Christmas tree and shadows of guests moving about. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my dress and rang the doorbell. Lisa answered, her face freezing in what I'm sure she thought was a welcoming smile when she saw me. "Martha, you came." Her voice pitched slightly too high, her eyes darting over my shoulder as if checking whether I brought reinforcements. Behind her, the scent of roasting turkey and pine needles wrapped. David appeared second. Last red smile not quite easy. Mom, let me take it. As he helped me on my knees, I noticed his fingers lingering in my hair. He opened the bank document. Out and showed me. Lisa, David, you come later. All conversation died on the then resumed at a slightly louder note. I accepted the last one. All while watching David and Lisa. They clearly expected me to make a scene like this. My silence and murmuring more than out of the home. It was during the dinner. As played perfectly around, I cleared my throat delicately. Every eye turned to me. "Before we enjoy this lovely meal," I said, my voice carrying effortlessly in the sudden quiet, "I have a small Christmas gift for David and Lisa." I reached for my bag, noting how David's knuckles whitened around his fork. When I produced the innocuous-looking envelope, the attorney's letter I'd carefully resealed, his face drained of color. "This came to my house by mistake." I continued pleasantly, sliding across the table toward him. "I thought you'd want it before the holidays were over." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the crackle of the fireplace. Lisa's mother, Carol, was the first to recover. "What is it, darling?" she asked her daughter, reaching for the envelope. David snatched it away with a forced laugh. "Just some boring legal stuff, nothing important." His eyes met mine across the table, and in that moment, we both knew the game had changed. I took a sip of wine, savoring the rich flavor as conversation slowly resumed around us. The main event was still to come. After all, they hadn't even seen the foreclosure notice yet. But for now, watching David sweat over his Christmas dinner was gift enough. The tension around the dinner table thickened like gravy left too long on the stove. David kept glancing at the sealed envelope beside his plate, his fingers twitching every time someone passed the mashed potatoes near it. Lisa's laughter at a neighbor's joke came out shrill and unnatural, her eyes darting between me and her husband with increasing panic. I took small, deliberate bites of my food, savoring both the perfectly seasoned turkey and the delicious discomfort radiating from my hosts. The other guests remained oblivious, their chatter about holiday plans and New Year resolutions creating a stark contrast to the silent battle unfolding between the three of us. Midway through dessert, a pecan pie that tasted like sawdust in my mouth, David finally cracked. "Mom," he said loudly enough to cut through conversations, "could I speak with you in the study for a moment?" His smile looked painful, the corners of his mouth trembling with the effort. I dabbed my lips with a napkin, making him wait just a beat too long before responding. "Of course, dear," I said sweetly, rising with deliberate slowness. As we excused ourselves, I noticed Lisa gripping her wine glass, so tightly I feared it might shatter. The study, a room I'd helped David furnish when he first moved in, felt colder than the rest of the house. David closed the door with exaggerated care before whirling on me. The attorney's envelope crumpled in his fist. "What the hell is this, Mom?" he hissed, his voice low but vibrating with fury. "Were you spying on my mail?" I settled into the leather chair behind what had once been my desk, the one David had claimed for his home office. Before answering, "It came to my house by mistake, David. I thought you'd want it back before your attorney wondered why you weren't responding." The color drained from his face as he realized I'd not only seen the letter, but understood exactly what it meant. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Look, Mom, this is all just a misunderstanding." He adopted that wheedling tone I remember from when he was 16 and had crashed my car. Lisa's parents put these ideas in our heads. They kept saying how strange it was that the house was still in your name after all these years. I arched an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch until he squirmed. When he continued, his words tumbled out in a rush. "We can fix this. We'll refinance immediately. Pay you back every penny with interest. Just don't do anything drastic." I studied my son, the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. The way his left eye twitched the way it always did when he lied. "Drastic," I repeated softly. "Like disinviting your mother from Christmas? Like trying to declare me mentally incompetent?" David flinched as if I'd struck him. "That's not, we wouldn't actually." I cut him off with a raised hand. "The bank has already started foreclosure proceedings, David." The words landed like a bombshell. His mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. You can't do that," he finally whispered. "Oh, I already have," I said, standing to straighten my dress. "But here's what's going to happen next." I stepped closer, close enough to smell the bourbon on his breath. "You're going to walk back into that dinner party and announce to everyone that you and Lisa have decided to sell this house, that it's time for a fresh start." David's eyes widened. "But you'll say the market is perfect right now," I continued as if he hadn't spoken, "and that you found a lovely smaller place that better suits your needs." My smile turned razor sharp. "Which you have. I took the liberty of selecting a few listings for you." David's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally something resembling grudging respect. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" he muttered. I reached up to adjust his crooked tie, the way I had when he was a boy heading to school concerts. "No, David. I just thought of what you forgot, that actions have consequences." A sharp knock at the door made us both turn. Lisa stood there, her face pale. "Everyone's asking where you two disappeared to," she said, her voice strained. David looked at me, waiting. I gave a tiny nod. "Actually, honey," he said, forcing cheer into his voice, "we have some news to share with everyone." As we returned to the dining room, I noticed the way David's hand shook as he poured himself another drink. The guests turned expectant faces toward us, their forks hovering mid-bite. "Lisa and I have been doing some thinking," David began, his voice gaining strength as he spun the lie I'd handed him. "We decided it's time for a change." While he spoke, my fingers traced the edge of my phone in my pocket. The real twist, the one neither David nor Lisa saw coming, was a text message I received just before dinner. The bank had approved my petition for immediate eviction proceedings. The clock was ticking louder than they knew. The reactions around the dinner table unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Lisa's mother dropping her fork with clatter, the neighbors exchanging confused glances, Lisa herself gripping the table's edge so tightly her manicured nails dug into the wood grain. David's voice gained false confidence as he spun the story about wanting a fresh start, his eyes darting to me every few seconds as if checking whether the performance met my expectations. I maintained a serene expression, occasionally nodding along as if this were wonderful news. While inside, I cataloged every micro-expression of panic crossing my daughter-in-law's face. The pecan pie suddenly tasted sweeter. When the guests finally left, their cheerful holiday goodbyes laced with bewildered curiosity, the real confrontation began. Lisa waited exactly 37 seconds after the door closed before rounding on David. "Have you lost your mind?" she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the high ceilings of the foyer. "We can't sell this house. We just finished the basement renovation." David shot me a helpless look, but I simply settled deeper into their plush sofa, watching the unraveling with detached interest. Their marriage, built on shared greed rather than genuine affection, showed its fractures in how quickly they turned on each other. Lisa's mother, Carol, lingered by the staircase, her face a mass of calculation as she reassessed a woman she clearly underestimated for years. It was Carol who made the first strategic move. "Martha," she said in a tone dripping with full warmth, Surely there's a more family-friendly solution to all this. She perched on the armchair across from me, her designer dress rustling. Perhaps David could sign a new payment plan? With proper interest, of course. Her smile didn't reach her cold eyes. I admired her attempt, really. The way she positioned herself as mediator while subtly reminding me that blood should matter more than money. But I'd done my homework. Reaching into my bag, I produced another set of documents. Printouts of property records showing that Carol herself had taken out a second mortgage on her home last summer. How's your own financial situation, Carol? I asked pleasantly. Still making those adjustable rate payments? The room went dead silent. Carol's face turned an unbecoming shade of puce. David looked between us like a spectator at a tennis match. It was Lisa who surprised me with a sudden guttural sob before fleeing upstairs. The sound of a slamming door echoed through the house. David made to follow her, but I cleared my throat sharply. Sit down, David. We're not done. The authority in my voice, the same tone that had sent him to his room as a misbehaving child, made his legs buckle before his brain decided whether to obey. What followed was 2 hours of brutal truth telling. I laid out every missed payment, every financial shortcut they'd taken, every time they prioritized vacations over their obligations. David alternated between anger and pleading, his arguments growing increasingly desperate, and he finally whispered, "You really make us homeless, Mom." I didn't flinch. "You made me childless with Christmas." I replied, "Seems reason." The real twist came at midnight, exhausted from emotional showdown. I had just gathered my things to leave when my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made my breath catch. Urgent. Henderson property title search results. Attached was a document from a private investigator I had quietly hired weeks earlier. One who'd been digging into why David and Lisa were suddenly so desperate to claim full ownership of the house. The contents turned my stomach. Zoning notices, city planning documents, and a proposed commercial development plan that would turn this entire neighborhood into a shopping complex within 18 months, with David and Lisa's property as the anchor parcel. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd been planning to cash in on a windfall while cutting me out completely. The sale price listed was nearly triple the home's current value. I looked up from my phone to find David watching me, his expression shifting from exhaustion to dawning horror as he realized what I must have discovered. The game wasn't over after all. It had just entered its final, most devastating phase. The digital clock on David's microwave blinked 12:37 a.m. when the full weight of the discovery settled over me. The development plans glowed on my phone screen, detailed architectural renderings of a shopping plaza where this quiet neighborhood now stood, complete with glossy logo for Summit Commercial Properties stamped across the top. My fingers trembled slightly as I zoomed in on the signature page, where David and Lisa's names appeared beside a proposed sale date just 3 months away. The pieces fell together with brutal clarity. Their sudden urgency to remove my name from the deed, the skipped mortgage payments, likely diverting funds to secure this deal, even Lisa's uncharacteristic interest in local zoning meetings last spring. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a meticulously planned financial coup. David must have seen the moment understanding dawn on my face because he lunged for his laptop on the coffee table, snapping it shut with a panicked click. Too late. I met his gaze steadily, watching the last remnants of his bravado crumble. "How long have you known about the redevelopment plan?" My voice sounded eerily calm, like the quiet before a tornado touches down. His throat worked as he swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the staircase where Lisa had retreated. "Mom, it's not what you think. Try again." I interrupted, tapping my phone screen. "This proposal was dated 8 months ago, right around the time you forgot your first mortgage payment." A choked sob from the doorway made us both turn. Lisa stood there, her mascara smeared in dark streaks down her cheeks, clutching a wad of tissues. "We were going to tell you," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "We planned to give you a cut of profits." David shot her a furious look, but the damage was done. The admission hung between us, sour as spoiled milk. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all, their grand scheme unraveling, because Lisa couldn't handle the pressure of being caught. Then came the twist I never anticipated. Carol stepped forward, her earlier hostility replaced by something resembling reluctant respect. "Martha," she said, folding her arms, "let's stop pretending. You've clearly outmaneuvered them." Her gaze flicked to her daughter's tear-streaked face with obvious disappointment. "But here's what you don't know. The developers need all 12 houses on the block to sign, or the deal collapses. And old Mr. Peterson, at number 214, will never sell. His father built that house with his own hands. A smug smile played on her lips. So unless you want to sit on a worthless property when the neighborhood turns into a construction zone, we should discuss a compromise. The air left my lungs in a rush. This changed everything. If the development couldn't proceed, David and Lisa's plans would implode, but so would any chance of recouping my investment. The house's value would plummet once bulldozers arrived. For the first time that night, uncertainty crept in. David seized the opportunity. "Mom, listen," he said, scrambling to his feet. "The offer is $1.2 million, almost triple what we owe. We'll pay off the mortgage, give you your original down payment plus 20%, and everyone wins." His voice took on a wheedling tone I remembered from childhood when he wanted an extra cookie before dinner. "You'd come out ahead, and we'd still have enough for a new place. Isn't that fair?" Fair. The word echoed in the silent living room. Fair would have been an invitation to Christmas dinner. Fair would have been honesty instead of legal maneuvering. Fair would have been my son looking at me these past years and seeing a person instead of financial obstacle. I studied their faces. David's desperate hope, Lisa's red-rimmed eyes, Carol's calculating stare, and made my decision. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, slipping my phone into my purse with deliberate slowness. "Tomorrow morning, you'll contact the developers and tell them the deal is off unless they renegotiate the terms with me directly." David opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. "You'll also sign over full ownership of your current real estate holdings, including that Florida timeshare you forgot to mention when pleading poverty last year." Lisa gasped, "How did you—" "And if either of you so much as consult an attorney without me present," I continued smoothly, "I'll file not only for foreclosure, but for fraud charges regarding those fabricated texts you plan to use against me." The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly in the stunned silence. Outside, the first flakes of a late-night snowstorm began dusting the driveway. David's shoulders slumped in defeat, but it was Carol who surprised me with a slow, approving nod. "Well played, Martha," she murmured. Even in betrayal, there was a perverse respect among thieves. I buttoned my coat, the leather portfolio of documents tucked securely under my arm. "I'll expect your call by 9 a.m., I said, turning toward the door. Then, pausing on the threshold, I added softly, "Oh, and David, Merry Christmas." The drive home through the swirling snow gave me time to plan my next move, because the email attachment had contained one final revelation, a name I recognized on the developer's contact list, an old college friend who owed me a very large favor. This game wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The snow had transformed into a full-blown blizzard by the time I pulled into my driveway, the tires crunching through thickening powder as I parked. Inside, the house felt unnaturally silent compared to the chaos I'd left behind at David's. I shrugged off my coat, the red fabric still carrying the faint scent of pine needles and Lisa's cloying perfume, and set the leather portfolio on the kitchen counter with deliberate care. My fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. Pouring myself a generous measure of bourbon, I opened my laptop and pulled up the full development proposal again, studying every page with fresh eyes. The name that had caught my attention earlier glared back at me from the signature line. Richard Langford, CEO of Summit Commercial Properties. Ricky, as I'd known him 40 years ago when we dated briefly during our junior year at Penn State. The same Ricky who'd borrowed $15,000 from my father to start his first business and never repaid a cent before vanishing after graduation. A slow smile curved my lips as I reached for my phone. A quick LinkedIn search confirmed it was the same man, older now, with silver threading his dark hair and the same arrogant tilt to his chin in his profile photo. The About section boasted of his company's ethical redevelopment practices and community-focused vision. The hypocrisy burned almost as much as the bourbon sliding down my throat. I snapped a photo of the mortgage documents with my name clearly visible, attached it to an email with the subject line, "Repayment terms long overdue," and added only 2 sentences. "Remember William Henderson's loan? Let's discuss how you'll settle that debt before proceeding with my neighborhood." I hit send at 1:47 a.m., the perfect hour for unsettling messages to land in a guilty man's inbox. Sleep proved impossible. I paced my living room, the events of the night replaying in my mind like a dramatic film. David's panicked expression when he realized I knew about the development deal. Carol's grudging respect, Lisa's tearful confession. The grandfather clock chimed 3 a.m. as I finally settled into my armchair with a second glass of bourbon, the storm howling outside like the ghost of Christmas has passed. My phone buzzed with a notification at 3:23 a.m., an incoming call from an unknown number. Richard's voice, deeper but still unmistakable, came through the line before I could even greet him. Martha Henderson. Christ, I thought you might be dead. There was no warmth in his tone, only wary calculation. Not yet, I replied, matching his coolness, though you clearly hoped my father was when you stole from him. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in veiled threats and uneasy negotiation. Richard confirmed what Carol had hinted. The development needed full block participation, and old Mr. Peterson was indeed the holdout. But the revelation came when Richard admitted, voice tight with frustration. Your son promised he'd get Peterson to sell. Said he had leverage. My grip tightened on the phone. What could David possibly have on the elderly widower? Then it hit me. Mr. Peterson's adult grandson had a drug conviction. David, as a junior partner at a law firm, might have access to sealed records or other sensitive information. The depths of my son's ruthlessness shocked even me. By dawn, Richard and I had reached an understanding. In exchange for my cooperation and my silence about his past financial misdeeds, Summit Properties would purchase my mortgage outright at 150% of its value, with additional consulting fees that coincidentally matched a $15,000 debt plus 40 years of interest. The kicker? David and Lisa would receive their payout, but only after signing over power of attorney to me regarding all their real estate dealings for the next 5 years. Richard had chuckled darkly at that clause. You're still vicious, Martha. I always liked that about you. The snow had stopped by morning, leaving the world outside my windows eerily pristine, the sunlight glaring off white drifts. My phone rang at 8:59 a.m., 1 minute before my deadline. David's voice was hollow, defeated. We'll agree to your terms. There was a pause, then the barest whisper. How did you know about Ricky? I stared at the family photo on my mantle, a younger David grinning up at me from his 5th grade soccer team. A mother always knows more than her children think. I said softly, then hardened my tone. The documents will be ready by noon. Bring Lisa and your notary friend, the one who helped with your fraudulent competency claim. The sharp intake of breath on his end told me my guess had struck true. As I hung up, another call came in, this time from Mr. Peterson himself. His raspy voice carried a note of urgency. Martha, that boy of yours was just here with some nonsense about zoning violations on my property. You should know. It's handled, George. I interrupted gently. The development's off. Your grandson's record stays sealed. The line went quiet for a long moment before he gruffly replied, Your father will be proud of you today. The unexpected words lodged in my throat like a sob. I managed a quiet thank you before ending the call. The paperwork signing that afternoon was a tense, silent affair in my sunlit dining room. David and Lisa arrived looking haggard, their holiday finery replaced by rumpled casual wear. Richard's attorney, a sleek woman in a black pantsuit, oversaw proceedings with clinical efficiency. Only when the last signature was scrawled did the dam break. Lisa burst into tears, fleeing to the bathroom, while David stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. Happy now? He spat, his hand shaking. I met his gaze steadily. No, I said honestly, but I am at peace. As they left, Richard lingered at the door, his expensive cologne overpowering the faint scent of pine still clinging to my clothes. We should have dinner sometime, he said with a smirk that suggested he thought this was a victory for us both. I smiled thinly and shut the door in his face. Alone at last, I poured myself a final glass of bourbon and toasted my reflection in the window. The woman staring back had silver hair and sharp eyes, her spine straight with hard-won dignity. Outside, the setting sun painted the snow in shades of gold and pink, beautiful but fleeting, like family, like trust, like Christmas magic that never lasted past December. I sipped my drink and began drafting a new will. After all, every good story needs an epilogue. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the paperwork spread before me. I traced a finger over David's shaky signature on the power of attorney documents, the ink still fresh from yesterday's signing. The legal transfer of the house back to my name had gone through at midnight, but the true weight of what I'd done only settled over me now in the quiet dawn. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten as I stared at the text message that had just arrived from an unknown number. The Peterson matter requires further discussion. Meet me at the old diner. 10 a.m. No signature, but I knew it could only be from Richard. What more could there possibly be to discuss? Our deal was done. The development was dead. Unless Richard had discovered something that changed the game yet again. The Lakeside Diner hadn't changed in 40 years. Same cracked vinyl booths, same smell of bacon grease and weak coffee. Richard sat in the back corner booth, his expensive suit glaringly out of place among the truckers and retirees. He stood when I entered, that same charming smile on his face that had once convinced my father to empty his savings account. "Martha," he said, reaching for my hands. I let him take them, noting how his fingers lingered just a second too long. "You look..." His eyes dropped to my simple blouse and slacks. "Different." I slid into the booth across from him, refusing the menu the waitress offered. "What couldn't wait until business hours, Ricky?" His smile faltered at the childhood nickname. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Your son came to see me last night, after your little meeting." A chill ran down my spine despite the diner's stifling heat. David had seemed so defeated yesterday. What could he possibly have left to try? Richard continued. "He brought me something interesting. Seems there's a clause in your original mortgage agreement that even you didn't know about." He slid a folded paper across the table. "Page 17, paragraph 3. The words blurred before my eyes as I read. "In the event of borrower's death, full ownership transfers automatically to co-signer with no probate proceedings." My breath caught. I'd never co-signed anything. The mortgage was entirely in my name. But there, in faint but legible script at the bottom of the page, was my signature, or rather, a near-perfect forgery, dated 6 months after the original signing. "This is fake," I whispered, my throat tight. Richard's smile turned pitying. "Is it? Because the notary stamp checks out. That same notary who witnessed your documents yesterday, as I recall." The eggs and toast the waitress set before me congealed untouched as Richard laid out his new proposal. With this document, which David claimed I had signed during one of my confused spells, Richard could argue the house rightfully belonged to David already. All the foreclosure proceedings, all my careful maneuvering, could be undone with a single court filing. Unless what? I asked, my voice steady than I felt. Richard's fingers tapped the table. "Unless you agree to let the development proceed. Your full support at the zoning meeting next week. In return, I'll make this document disappear." The diner's clock ticked loudly as I weighed my options. Outside, a delivery truck backfired, making me jump. That's when I noticed it. The faint red light blinking on Richard's briefcase, a recording device. Of course, he wanted my verbal agreement to his blackmail. I took a deliberate sip of water, buying time. Then I smiled. "You always were a terrible judge of character, Ricky." His eyebrows shot up. "David may have fooled you with this forgery, but you forgot one thing. 6 months after signing that mortgage, I was in a full-arm cast after my car accident. Look at the signature date." I flipped the paper over, revealing the hospital discharge papers I'd pulled up on my phone, dated 3 days before the supposed signing. My right arm was immobilized. I couldn't have signed anything. Richard's face went slack with shock. I stood, dropping a 20 on the table. "Tell my son he's just bought himself a fraud charge to go with the foreclosure. And Ricky," I leaned close enough to smell his expensive cologne. "That recording in your briefcase? My attorney will be subpoenaing it as evidence." The winter air felt bracing as I stepped outside, my breath coming in visible puffs. But my victory felt hollow. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about Christmas and become something darker, a war between people who were supposed to love each other. My phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Peterson. "Need to talk. It's about your son." I sighed, watching the snow begin to fall again. The game wasn't over after all. The snow crunched under my boots as I made my way to Mr. Peterson's house, the cold air biting at my cheeks. His texts had been urgent, and the way the morning's events had unfolded left me with a gnawing sense that there were still pieces of this puzzle I hadn't yet uncovered. The Peterson home stood at the end of the block, a sturdy brick colonial with a wraparound porch that had seen better days. George Peterson was waiting at the door, his gnarled hands gripping a steaming mug of coffee, his face lined with more worry than I'd ever seen on a usually stoic man. "Come in, Martha," he said, his voice gravelly with age and something else. Fear, perhaps. "There's things you need to know about that boy of yours that'll turn your stomach." The interior of the house smelled of wood polish and old books, a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of David's home. George led me to his study, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across walls lined with framed photos of his family. On his desk lay a manila folder, thick with papers. Been doing some digging since your son came sniffing around here, George said, sinking into his worn leather chair with a grunt. Turns out his interest in my property ain't the only shady thing he's been up to. He pushed the folder toward me. And as I flipped it open, my blood ran colder than the winter air outside. The documents inside painted a picture of financial manipulation that took my breath away. Bank statements showing large, unexplained deposits into David's account over the past year. Emails between him and a private investigator discussing leverage over several neighbors besides George. Most damning of all, a series of text messages with Lisa, where they joke about mom's little nest egg and how easy it had been to play the long game. The dates went back further than I wanted to admit. Back to when I first taken out the mortgage for their house. My hands trembled as I reached the final page. A life insurance policy taken out in my name, with David as the sole beneficiary. The amount was staggering. The date of issue? 1 week after I'd signed the mortgage papers 5 years ago. The room spun around me. This wasn't just about a house or a development deal. This was calculated, premeditated. George's voice came from far away as he explained how he'd gotten these documents. His grandson, the one with the drug record, worked IT at David's law firm and had grown suspicious when David asked him to hack into several neighbors' financial records. "The boy's got a good heart under all his troubles," George said gruffly. "When he saw what your son was planning for you, he came to me." I sat there for what felt like hours, staring into the fire as the pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. The missed mortgage payments weren't carelessness. They were pressure, testing to see how much financial strain I could handle. The sudden disinvitation from Christmas, a way to isolate me, to make me vulnerable. Even Richard's reappearance couldn't be coincidence. David must have sought him out, knowing our history. This was all part of some grotesque plan years in the making. The grandfather clock in George's hallway chimed noon. The sound jolted me from my thoughts. Outside, the snow had started up again, thick flakes sticking to the windows. George reached across the desk and squeezed my hand, his skin papery but warm. "What will you do?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the firelight. I closed the folder with deliberate slowness, my mind already working through options. The evidence here was enough for criminal charges. Fraud, conspiracy, possibly even attempted murder, if a prosecutor could prove intent with that insurance policy. But the thought of my only son in prison twisted something deep inside me. Then I remembered the look on David's face at the diner, when he thought he'd won. The casual cruelty in those texts with Lisa. The way they'd laughed about manipulating me. Standing, I tucked the folder under my arm and met George's gaze squarely. "I think it's time my son learned what real consequences feel like," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. As I stepped back out into the snow, my phone buzzed with another text from David. "We need to talk. I know you saw Richard." I smiled grimly at the message, snowflakes catching in my hair. Oh, we would talk. But this time, I'd be the one holding all the cards. The drive to David's house felt like moving through a dream, the snow falling so thick now that the windshield wipers could barely keep up. The folder of documents sat on the passenger seat, like a living thing, pulsing with the terrible truths it contained. I called my attorney on the way, his shocked silence after hearing about the life insurance policy speaking volumes. "Martha," he'd finally said, "this goes beyond civil matters. You need to consider going to the police." But before I did that, I needed to look my son in the eye one last time. Needed to see if there was any flicker of remorse, any trace of the boy I'd raised still left in him. Their house blazed with light despite the early afternoon gloom. The Christmas decorations suddenly garish rather than cheerful. David opened the door before I could knock, his face pale, eyes darting to the folder in my hands. "Mom," he began, but I brushed past it without a word, my boots leaving wet prints on their pristine hardwood floors. Lisa stood in the living room, her hands twisting together, her usual composure shattered. The scent of pine from their towering Christmas tree mixed nauseatingly with her floral perfume. I didn't sit, didn't accept the coffee Lisa wordlessly offered. Instead, I dropped the folder onto their glass coffee table with a slap that made them both flinch. "Explain this," I said, my voice dangerously calm. David's hands shook as he opened it, Lisa peering over his shoulder. Their reactions told me everything. The widening eyes, the quick, panicked glance at each other. David's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. "Where did you get these?" he finally croaked. "That doesn't matter," I said, moving to stand before the fireplace, the heat doing nothing to thaw the ice in my veins. "What matters is that I know everything now. The plan to pressure me into signing over the house. The life insurance policy. The way you've been manipulating our neighbors." My voice broke then, just for a second. "How long, David? How long have you been planning to profit from my death?" Lisa burst into tears, collapsing onto the sofa, but David's face hardened into something I barely recognized. "You don't understand," he spat. "Do you have any idea what it's like living in your shadow? The great Martha Henderson, always so perfect, so in control." He began pacing, his voice rising with each word. "That down payment you gave us? It wasn't a gift. It was a leash. Every month writing those checks to you, knowing you still held the deed. It was like being a child all over again." His words hit like physical blows, but the most shocking part was the twisted logic behind them. The way he convinced himself he was a victim. I thought of all the sacrifices I'd made, the retirement funds I'd drained to help them, the years of putting his needs before my own. And this was how he saw me? As some kind of tyrant? The doorbell rang, then a sharp, insistent sound. David froze mid-rant, his eyes darting to the door. Expecting someone? I asked coldly. When it moved, I went myself, swinging the door open to reveal 2 uniformed police officers and a detective in a trench coat, snow dusting their shoulders. "Martha Henderson?" the detective asked. At my nod, he continued. "We spoke with your attorney. We'd like to ask your son some questions." David's scream of rage from the living room sent one officer's hand to his holster. "You called the cops on me? Your own son." He appeared in the doorway, face contorted with fury. The detective stepped forward smoothly. "Mr. Henderson, we have a warrant to search your home and office computers. There are allegations of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted elder abuse." As the officers moved past us into the house, David turned to me with a look of such hatred it stole my breath. "You'll regret this," he hissed. But as they led him away in handcuffs, Lisa sobbing inconsolably on the stairs, the only thing I regretted was not seeing the truth about my son sooner. The snow had stopped when I finally stepped outside, the late afternoon sun breaking through the clouds in dramatic shafts of golden light. Across the street, George Peterson stood on his porch, gave me a solemn nod, then went inside. My phone buzzed. The bank, confirming the foreclosure was complete. The house was mine again, free and clear. But as I looked back at the grand home with its twinkling lights and now empty driveway, all I felt was tired. And then my phone buzzed again. A new email from Richard Langford. The subject line, "We need to talk about your granddaughter." My blood ran cold. I had no granddaughter. Unless David and Lisa had been hiding something even bigger than I'd imagined. The game, it seemed, wasn't over after all. The email from Richard Langford burned in my mind as I drove through the snow-glazed streets, the winter sun casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like grasping fingers across the road. My hands clenched the steering wheel with such force that my knuckles ached. The words, "We need to talk about your granddaughter," flashing behind my eyelids every time I blinked. It made no sense. David and Lisa had never mentioned trying for children, and Lisa's social media was filled with posts about their fur babies and lavish vacations, never any hint of pregnancy. Unless the child wasn't Lisa's. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through me. Richard's office was in one of those sleek downtown high-rises, all glass and steel, the kind of place designed to intimidate before you even stepped inside. The receptionist gave me a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes as she led me to a conference room with a view of the city skyline. Richard stood by the window, silhouetted against the fading afternoon light, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He turned as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Martha," he said, gesturing to a chair. I wondered how long it would take you to come. I remained standing, my purse still clutched tightly in my hands. "What's this about a granddaughter?" My voice came out sharper than I'd intended, bouncing off the glass walls. Richard took a slow sip of his drink before answering. "Your son's been keeping secrets from everyone, it seems." He pressed a button on the conference table, and a scream descended from the ceiling. "This is Emily. She's 4 years old." The photo that appeared took my breath away. A little girl with David's unmistakable hazel eyes and the same cowlick at her forehead that he'd had as a child. She sat on a swing, her grin missing one front tooth, her hair in messy pigtails. The background looked like a public park, the kind with plastic slides and bark chips underfoot. Her mother was one of David's paralegals, Richard continued, flipping to another image. This one a young woman with tired eyes holding the same child in a hospital waiting room. Sarah Wilkins. She died 6 months ago. Ovarian cancer. The room tilted around me. I groped blindly for the chair behind me, my legs suddenly unsteady. Richard's voice seemed to come from very far away as he explained what he'd uncovered. David's affair 5 years ago. The child he refused to acknowledge. The modest bank account Sarah had scraped together for Emily's care before her death. The girl's in foster care now, Richard said, his tone oddly gentle. David was paying child support under the table to keep it quiet. But when Sarah died, he trailed off meaningfully. A white-hot rage ignited in my chest, burning away the shock. All this time, David had been scheming to profit from my death, while his own flesh and blood languished in the system. The hypocrisy was staggering. I stood abruptly, my chair screeching against the polished concrete floor. Where is she? Richard handed me a file folder. I took the liberty of tracking her down. She's with family in Maplewood. Good people, by all accounts. But given the circumstances, he didn't need to finish the thought. The documents inside contained everything. Emily's birth certificate, father listed as unknown, but the timing matched David's affair. Sarah's obituary, even the foster family's address. The drive to Maplewood passed in a blur, the winter twilight painting the sky in shades of violet and rose. The foster home was a modest ranch-style house with a snowman melting in the front yard and colorful plastic toys scattered across the porch. Through the front window, I could see a woman reading to a small girl on the couch. The same girl from Richard's photo, her hair now in a single messy braid. I sat in my car for a long time, watching as the woman, Mrs. Alvarez, according to Richard's file, helped Emily into pajamas, the little girl giggling at something unseen. My mind raced with possibilities, with logistics, with the sheer enormity of what I just learned. David's arrest, the foreclosure, the life insurance scheme, all of it paled in comparison to this new revelation. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney. David's being arraigned tomorrow. Prosecutors want to speak with you. I glanced back at the house, where Mrs. Alvarez was now turning out the lights in the living room. A fierce protectiveness surged through me, sudden and overwhelming. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. I wouldn't let Emily pay for her father's sins. But first, I needed to make one more stop. The county jail's visiting hours ended at 8 p.m. I had just enough time to look my son in the eye and ask him how he could abandon his own child while plotting to profit from his mother's death. The answers, I suspected, would hurt more than any betrayal that had come before. The county jail smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects as I waited in the stark visitation room. The plastic chair dug into my back, but I refused to shift positions, keeping my spine straight and my hands folded neatly on the scarred metal table. When the door finally clanged open and David shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him, the sight knocked the breath from my lungs. The arrogant man from Christmas dinner was gone. In his place stood a hollow-cheeked stranger with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders. The guard guided him to the seat across from me, and for a long moment, we simply stared at each other through the plexiglass divider. David was the first to break the silence. Come to gloat? His voice was rough, stripped of its usual polish. I didn't answer immediately, instead reaching into my purse to withdraw the photo Richard had given me. Emily on the swings, her laughter frozen in time. I slid it across the table with deliberate slowness, watching as David's eyes dropped to the image, then flew back to mine, wide with panic. "Where did you get that?" he hissed, his cuffed hands twitching toward the photo before jerking back. "Her name is Emily," I said, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. "She's 4 years old. Her mother died 6 months ago of cancer, while you were busy forging documents and plotting to steal my home." David's face cycled through shock, denial, and finally something resembling shame as he slumped back in his chair. "It wasn't like that," he muttered, but the fight had drained from his voice. The story spilled out in fits and starts. How Sarah had been a summer intern at his firm. How the affair had lasted barely 2 months. How he'd refused to believe the child was his until paternity tests proved otherwise. "I'd paid support," he insisted, a desperate edge creeping into his tone. "Not as much as I should have, but I paid. Then when Sarah got sick," he trailed off, his throat working. "I thought about stepping up. I swear I did. But Lisa would have left me, taken everything. And the scandal of the firm." I cut him off with a sharp gesture, my wedding ring clinking against the plexiglass. "You let your daughter go into foster care because you were worried about your reputation?" The words came out strangled, thick with disgust. David flinched as if I'd struck him. "What was I supposed to do?" He shot back, some of his old fire returning. "You saw how she lived. Sarah was always behind on rent, always scrambling. That's no life for a kid." The hypocrisy was staggering. I leaned forward, my breath fogging the barrier between us. And the life insurance policy? The one you took out on me right after I signed a mortgage? Was that for Emily's benefit too? David's face went slack with shock. Clearly, he hadn't realized I knew about that particular betrayal. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed a week. It was a backup plan, Lisa's idea mostly. We never really thought. A loud buzz interrupted him as the guard announced the end of visitation time. David looked almost relieved as he stood, but I wasn't done yet. One more thing, I said, rising to meet his gaze squarely. I retain custody of Emily. She'll be living with me from now on. The color drained from David's face. You can't. I already have. I interrupted. The judge was quite sympathetic when I explained how her father was in jail for trying to fraud her grandmother. The guard moved to escort David out, but he resisted just long enough to deliver his parting shot. You always have to win, don't you, Mom? His voice cracked on the last word, even when it means destroying your own son. Then he was gone, the metal door clanging shut behind him with finality. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the smudged plexiglass, an old woman with silver hair and sorrow etched deep into the lines of her face. The photo of Emily still lay on the table, and I tucked it carefully back into my purse before turning to leave. Outside, the winter air was crisp and clean, washing away the jail-stale odors. My phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Alvarez. Emily had asked when I was coming back. A small, tentative warmth bloomed in my chest despite everything. There would be court hearings to attend, a grieving child to comfort, a house to make suitable for a 4-year-old. The road ahead was daunting, but for the first time in months, it felt like I had a purpose beyond vengeance. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my headlights illuminated a figure standing near the jail's entrance, Richard Langford, watching me with an unreadable expression. He raised a hand in silent acknowledgement, but I drove past without stopping. Some bridges were better left burned. The real twist came when I arrived back at Mrs. Alvarez's house. Emily was waiting at the window, her small face pressed against the glass. When she saw me, she didn't wave or smile. Instead, she held up a folded piece of construction paper. Through the window, I could just make out the childish scrawl. To Grandma. My breath caught. Somehow, impossibly, she already knew who I was. The construction paper trembled in my hands as I unfolded inside Mrs. Alvarez's cozy living room. The scent of simmering lentils and warm cornbread wrapping around us like a blanket. Emily's crayon drawing showed 3 stick figures, a tall one with gray scribble hair labeled Grandma, a medium one labeled Mommy with wings, and a small one with pigtails labeled me. At the bottom, in Mrs. Alvarez's neat handwriting, it read, "Emily says Mommy told her you'd come." My vision blurred as I traced the waxy lines, the weight of this child's loss hitting me anew. Her mother spoke about me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Alvarez nodded, her kind eyes glistening. Sarah kept a memory box for Emily. There's a letter inside. She asked that you read it when the time was right. The memory box was a simple pink shoebox tucked under Emily's temporary bed, its content meticulously organized. Hospital bracelets from Sarah's treatments, ultrasound photos, a lock of baby hair tied with ribbon. The envelope on top bore my name in elegant script. Emily watched solemnly as I opened it, her small fingers clutching the edge of my sweater like she feared I might vanish. The letter inside was dated 2 weeks before Sarah's passing. Asterisk, Dear Mrs. Henderson, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and someone has finally told you about Emily. Please know I never want to cause trouble for your family. David made it clear from the beginning that his career and marriage came first. But when the cancer came back last year, I started praying you'd find your way to us. Emily deserves to know her family, especially a grandmother who, if the stories David used to tell are true, has more love in her pinky finger than he has in his entire. Asterisk. The sentence ended abruptly, as if Sarah had been too weak to finish. A photograph slipped from the pages. David holding a newborn Emily in the hospital, his expression not the reluctant obligation I'd expected, but awestruck wonder. The date stamp placed at 3 days after her birth. This was a true betrayal. Not that David had fathered a child outside his marriage, but that he'd known genuine love for her and walked away regardless. Emily tugged my sleeve. Mommy said you tell the best stories, she whispered, her voice feather-light, about dragons and princesses and... Her brow furrowed, struggling to remember, and brave girls who save themselves. Something shattered and reformed inside me all at once. Sarah had given me more than custody of a grandchild. She'd given me back the version of myself David had tried to erase in his telling of our history. Mrs. Alvarez pressed a steaming mug of tea into my hands. "There's more you should know," she said gently. "Sarah's medical bills were covered by an anonymous donor these last 6 months. The hospital social worker thought it was a charity, but—" She hesitated, glancing at Emily coloring quietly on the rug. "The payments came from an account linked to Summit Commercial Properties." Richard Langford's face flashed in my mind. His presence at the jail, the odd gentleness when he'd show me Emily's photo. Had he been Sarah's secret benefactor? And if so, why? The pieces refused to fit together neatly. Outside, the wind howled around the eaves, rattling the windows like it sought entry. I stayed until Emily fell asleep. Her small body curled trustingly against my side as I read from a tattered copy of The Paper Bag Princess, the same book I'd read to David at her age. Driving home through the snow-glazed streets, my mind raced with logistics, converting the guest room into a child's bedroom, enrolling Emily in preschool, explaining the seismic family shift to the few friends I had left. But beneath the practical concerns thrummed a darker current. Richard's involvement suggested this wasn't over yet. The porch light of my house revealed an unexpected visitor waiting in the shadows. Lisa, her designer coat inadequate against cold, her face bare of makeup for the first time I could remember. She stood when I approached, her hands clutching a manila envelope. "I came to apologize," she said, her breath forming pale clouds in the air, "and to give you this." Inside the envelope were divorce papers filed that very afternoon, and a notarized affidavit detailing every financial scheme she and David had plotted against me over the years. "I didn't know about the little girl," Lisa whispered, her voice breaking. "But when I found out today, I realized the man I married is capable of abandoning his own child. What else is he capable of?" The documents glowed under the porch light, their contents more valuable than any Christmas gift. But as Lisa turned to leave, she dropped one final bombshell. "David's not without allies, Martha. He's been making calls from jail, to Richard, to some of his shady clients." She met my eyes squarely, snowflakes catching in her lashes. "Watch your back. And that sweet little girl's." The front door had barely closed behind me when my phone buzzed with a notification, a security alert from my home alarm system. Someone had attempted to access the backyard gate at 8:17 p.m. The timestamp matched exactly when I'd been reading to Emily. Upstairs, the guest room, soon to be Emily's room, stood empty and waiting. But the shadows in the corners seemed deeper tonight, the silence more ominous. I checked the locks twice before sinking onto the bed, Lisa's warning echoing in my ears. Some battles might be over, but the war for Emily's future had just begun. The pre-dawn light filtered through the blinds as I sat at the kitchen table. The contents of Sarah's memory box spread before me like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite assemble. Emily slept soundly upstairs in my bed. I hadn't had the heart to move her after she'd whimpered in her sleep, her small fingers clutching at my sleeve when I tried to tuck her into the guest room. The security alert from last night gnawed at me, its implications growing darker with each passing hour. Who would try to break into a house they knew was empty unless they were looking for something specific? The answer came with chilling clarity when I noticed the date on Sarah's last hospital discharge papers. December 23rd, the day before David disinvited me from Christmas. The timing couldn't be coincidence. Mrs. Alvarez's words about Richard Langford paying Sarah's medical bills looped in my mind as I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to chase away the last remnants of sleep. The first sip burned my tongue, but the jolt of caffeine helped sharpen my thoughts. If Richard had been helping Sarah, it wasn't out of charity, that much was certain, which meant Emily was somehow part of his endgame. The photograph of David holding newborn Emily caught the morning light as I turned it over, revealing a hastily scribbled note on the back. S. Says original birth certificate sealed. Backup copy safe with M. My breath hitched. M could only be Michael, Sarah's brother who died in a car accident last spring, according to the obituary tucked in the memory box. But backup copy of what? The doorbell rang at precisely 7:15 a.m., the chimes startlingly loud in the quiet house. Through the peephole, I saw Richard Langford standing on my porch, his usually impeccable suit rumpled, his hair uncharacteristically disheveled. He held a cardboard box labeled Sarah's Things in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. "Before you slam the door," he said when I opened a crack, "you'll want to see what's in here." His eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep, held none of their usual calculated charm. "It's about Emily's trust fund." The word stopped me cold. I stepped back to let him in, my fingers tightening around the baseball bat I'd taken to keeping by the door. Richard set the box on the entryway table with surprising gentleness before handing me the envelope. Inside were legal documents establishing a $250,000 trust for Emily, funded by Summit Commercial Properties and irrevocably tied to the development deal David had tried to push through. "Your son wasn't just scheming to get your house," Richard said, running a hand through his already messy hair. "He was using Emily as leverage against me." The story spilled out in fractured pieces. How David had discovered Richard's connection to Sarah. They'd met a cancer fundraiser Richard sponsored. How he threatened to expose Richard's past financial crimes unless he included the trust in the development deal. "I paid Sarah's medical bills because I owed her," Richard admitted, his voice rough. "She kept quiet about our history, even when David pressured her." His meaning became clear when I found the photo at the bottom of the box. A younger Richard with his arm around a beaming Sarah at what looked like a college graduation. The date stamp placed at 9 months before Emily was born. The room tilted around me. Emily's hazel eyes, so like David's, also held Richard's distinctive gold flecks. The math was undeniable. Richard wasn't just Emily's benefactor. He was her father, which meant David had been blackmailing Richard with his own daughter's welfare while letting his mother believe the child was his. The layers of deception took my breath away. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked as Emily stirred. Richard's head snapped up at the sound, his entire body tensing. "Does she know about me?" he asked, the vulnerability in his voice so raw it startled me. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "David made bail. Judge released him on technicality. He's coming for you." As if on cue, headlights flashed through the front window, a familiar black SUV pulling into my driveway. Richard moved faster than I expected, snatching up the trust documents and shoving them into his jacket. "Take Emily out the back," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "My car's around the block. Gray sedan. Go to the address in the GPS." He pressed keys into my hand, his fingers ice cold. "I'll handle David." The doorbell rang again, followed by insistent knocking. Richard's expression hardened into something dangerous. "He's not getting near her," he growled. And for the first time, I saw genuine emotion in the man I thought incapable of it. Not greed, not calculation, but the fierce protectiveness of a father. The knocking turned to pounding as I raced upstairs to wake Emily. Through her bedroom window, I spotted a second car idling at the curb, Lisa's white Lexus. Nothing about this situation was as it seemed. As I lifted a sleepy Emily into my arms, her small hands rubbing at her eyes, the front door crashed open below us. David's voice echoed through the house, furious and slurred. "Where is she? Where's my daughter?" Richard's response was too quiet to hear, but the sudden silence that followed was more terrifying than any shout. Emily buried her face in my neck, her breath warm against my skin, as I slipped out the back door into the freezing dawn. The keys Richard had given me dug into my palm, each jagged edge a reminder that nothing, not the house, not the money, not even blood, was as important as a child in my arms. Somewhere behind us, glass shattered. Emily whimpered. I ran. The gray sedan's engine roared to life as I buckled Emily into backseat, her sleepy confusion giving way to wide-eyed alarm at my urgency. The GPS screen illuminated with an address 30 miles north, a lakeside cabin according to the map. As I reversed down the alley, my headlights caught a flash of movement near my house's back porch. 2 figures grappling in the pre-dawn gloom, one tall and broad-shouldered Richard, the other wiry and frantic David. A metallic glint in David's hand made my foot slam the accelerator before I could process what I'd seen. Emily's small voice piped up from the back. "Grandma, is Daddy mad at us?" The question shattered me. How does one explain to a 4-year-old that her father might be holding a weapon against a man who just might be her biological father? The drive stretched interminably, every red light and slow-moving truck in agony. Emily eventually dozed off, her head lolling against the car's seat straps, while my mind raced through possibilities. Richard's sudden protectiveness, Lisa's ambiguous warning, David's inexplicable release. None of it added up cleanly. The trust fund documents now safely tucked in my purse suggested money was at the center of this maelstrom. But whose? And why involve Emily? The roads grew narrower as we left the suburbs behind, winding through dense pine forests where the rising sun barely penetrated. The cabin, when we finally reached it, wasn't the rustic retreat I'd imagined, but a sleek modern structure with security cameras discreetly mounted under the eaves. A keypad beside the front door blinked green as I entered Richard's code. My birth year, a detail that gave me pause. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and fresh coffee. A note on the kitchen counter in Richard's precise handwriting read, "Safe room behind bookshelf. Code 1991. Emily, now fully awake, explored the space with cautious curiosity, her tiny fingers tracing the spines of leather-bound books in the living room. I found a hidden panel exactly where promised. The entire bookshelf swung inward at the touch, revealing a panic room stock of supplies, a landline phone, and most surprisingly, a wall of surveillance feeds showing multiple angles of my house, Richard's office, and the county jail. The timestamp on the jail footage caught my eye. It was live, which meant someone had access to real-time prison cameras. Just who exactly was Richard Langford? The landline rang, making us both jump. Richard's voice came through strained but steady. David's in police custody again. Pulled a knife on a cop. A pause, then quieter. Is she okay? I glanced at Emily happily coloring at the kitchen table, oblivious to the storm swirling around her. She's perfect, I said, then lowered my voice. The safe room surveillance. You've been watching David this whole time? A long silence followed before Richard admitted, Not David. You. The confession hung between us, charged with unspoken history. Before I could respond, he continued urgently, There's something else you need to see. Bottom drawer of the desk. The drawer contained a single file labeled Henderson Trust. Inside were documents dating back decades, a trust fund established by my father weeks before his death, with Richard listed as co-trustee. The amounts made my head spin. This can't be real, I whispered into the phone. Richard's sigh crackled through the line. Your father never trusted banks. He gave me half the access codes the night he died. Said you'd get the other half when you turned 50. A beat. You turned 50 the year David got married. The implications hit like a physical blow. My father's mysterious lost fortune, the one we'd all assumed had been squandered in bad investments, had been quietly growing for decades. And David had married Lisa 6 months after my 50th birthday. The prenup he'd insisted on, the sudden interest in my finances. It had never been about the house. The house was pocket change compared to what he'd really been after. A new alert flashed on the surveillance screen. A car approaching the cabin's gate. The camera zoomed in on Lisa behind the wheel, her face drawn with exhaustion. Richard's voice turned sharp. Don't let her in. She's the one who posted David's bail. But as I watched, Lisa got out of the car and placed something on the ground, a pink teddy bear Emily had left at my house. When she straightened, she looked directly into the camera and mouthed, I'm sorry. Then she lifted her shirt to reveal a wire. The final piece clicked into place. David hadn't been working alone, and the person pulling his strings wasn't Richard. The surveillance screens flickered as Lisa stood frozen in the camera's gaze, her hands now raised in surrender with a pink teddy bear lying abandoned at her feet. Emily's delighted gasp when she spotted her lost toy through the monitor nearly made my heart stop. How could something so innocent exist amidst this nest of vipers? Richard's voice crackled to the landline speaker, urgent and low. Martha, listen carefully. The wire Lisa's wearing? It's not police issue. Look at the frequency display on the bottom right monitor. My eyes darted to the screen he indicated, where a string of numbers pulsed rhythmically. Not the steady pattern of law enforcement surveillance, but the erratic burst of a private recording device. Someone wasn't just listening. They were collecting evidence. But for what purpose? The answer came with stomach-churning clarity when the cabin's landline suddenly emitted a high-pitched whine before a new voice replaced Richard's, a voice that hadn't graced my ears in 15 years, yet was instantly, horrifyingly familiar. Hello, Martha. Carol's cultured tones dripped through the receiver like poison honey. Did you really think a few $1 million would satisfy me after what your family did? The surveillance screens abruptly changed, showing not just live feeds but archive footage. Clips of David as a child play in my backyard, my late husband bringing home the very first Christmas tree we'd ever had, even private moments no security camera should have captured. Carol had been watching our family for decades. Emily tugged at my sleeve, her small face pinched with concern. Grandma, you're squeezing too tight, she whispered. I forced my fingers to unclench from her tiny hand, but the rest of me remained frozen as Carol's voice continued, now amplified through hidden speakers in the cabin ceiling. Your father stole the love of my life, Martha. First figuratively when he blackballed Richard from Wall Street in '82, then literally when he gave Richard that loan with strings attached. The pieces tumbled into place with sickening clarity. Carol hadn't just married into money through Lisa's father. She'd orchestrated her daughter's entire relationship with David as the ultimate revenge. The prenup, the pressure produced an heir, which Lisa couldn't, hence David's affair. Even the timing of the development deal, all of it led back to Carol's decades-long vendetta against the Henderson name. The surveillance feed switched to a live shot of Richard being held at gunpoint by two men in my living room, his face bleeding from a cut above his eye. Carol's sigh filled the cabin. Such a shame. I'd hoped Richard would stay out of this after our little understanding following Sarah's death. Emily whimpered at the mention of her mother's name, her small body pressing against my legs. On screen, Richard lifted his head defiantly. "She knows, Carol," he spat. "Martha knows everything." A new alert flashed on the security system. Motion detected at the property's eastern tree line. The camera zoomed in on David staggering through the underbrush, his orange jumpsuit now replaced by street clothes, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. He collapsed against a pine tree, his mouth moving soundlessly as he stared directly into the camera lens. The image sharpened to show the word. He kept repeating, "Run." Carol's laughter tinkled through the speakers, the sound like breaking glass. "Oh, David," always a disappointment. First he couldn't give me a grandchild, then he botched stealing your inheritance. And now he's gone soft. The cabin's front door handle jiggled ominously. "But you, Martha, you surprised me. Finding Emily, uncovering the trust, even winning Richard's loyalty after all these years." The deadbolt clicked open with electronic precision. Carol had remote access to the entire property. "That's why I'm offering you a choice. Walk away right now with Emily and the trust funds, or stay and fight for the rest of your father's money, and watch everyone you love die try and protect you." Emily's arms wrapped around my waist, her face buried against my side. The landline screen flashed with an incoming data transfer, the full content of my father's trust. Enough money to disappear forever. Outside, twigs snapped as someone or several someones approached the cabin. Richard's pained grunt came through the speakers as one of his captors pistol-whipped him on screen. And in that suspended moment, I finally understood what my father tried to protect me from all those years ago. Not financial ruin, but this venomous woman who turned love into a weapon and family into a battlefield. The front door creaked open. I made my choice. The cabin door swung open with agonizing slowness, revealing not the armed enforcers I'd expected, but Lisa standing alone in the threshold, her designer blouse torn at the shoulder and her left eye swelling shut. She clutched Emily's pink teddy bear like a talisman, her hand shaking so violently the bear's glassy eyes seemed to tremble in fear. Behind her, the morning sun illuminated swirling dust motes in the air, giving the scene an eerie, dreamlike quality. "She's coming," Lisa whispered, her voice raw. Then she collapsed forward, catching herself on the doorframe at the last second. The back of her shirt had ridden up, revealing the wire Carol had planted. Not just a listening device, but a subcutaneous tracker pulsing with a faint red light. Emily darted past me before I could stop her, her small arms wrapping around Lisa's legs. "Auntie Lisa, you're hurt." The genuine affection in her voice shocked me. How did Emily know Lisa? Lisa's face crumpled as she stroked the child's hair with trembling fingers. "I'm so sorry, Firefly," she murmured, using the same endearment Sarah had written about in her letters. The surveillance screen behind me flickered violently before settling on a new image. Carol sitting regally in what appeared to be my living room. Richard now bound to a chair beside her, his head lolling groggily. Carol's voice purred through speakers, smooth as poisoned syrup. "Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies, Martha? Lisa's been my eyes in your son's life since their first date at Princeton." On screen, she stroked Richard's blood-matted hair almost tenderly. "And this one, well, we both know he's always been weak where you're concerned." The camera angle widened to show David handcuffed to my staircase railing, his face a mask of pain and dawning horror. Carol continued, "But little Emily here, she's the true masterpiece. The perfect combination of Henderson resilience and Sarah's. What did you call it in your diary, Richard? Inconvenient morality?" The pieces clicked together with brutal clarity. Emily wasn't just an accident Carol had exploited. She'd been part of the plan all along. A living, breathing time bomb planted to destroy the Henderson legacy from within. Lisa's choked sob confirmed it. "I didn't know," she gasped, clutching Emily tighter. "Not until last night, when Mother's files open automatically on the anniversary of the first betrayal." She met my eyes, tears cutting through the dirt on her face. "She never wanted the money, Martha. She wanted you to suffer like she did when Richard chose your family over hers." The surveillance feed cut abruptly to a document dated 25 years prior, a paternity test proving Richard was David's biological father. The room spun around me. All these years, I'd raised another woman's son, never knowing my husband's infidelity had spawned the very child who would grow up to betray me. Carol's laughter rang through the cabin. "Surprise, Martha. You've been playing house with my leftovers for decades. A metallic click came from the bedroom, the safe room door unlatching itself remotely. The landline screen flashed with a new message. Last chance. Walk away with the girl or watch Richard die live. On screen, Carol pressed a gun to Richard's temple, her manicured finger caressing the trigger. David screamed something muffled, straining against his cuffs. Emily, sensing the tension but not understanding it, reached up to touch Lisa's bruised face. "Does it hurt bad?" she asked with heartbreaking innocence. Lisa's breath hitched as she looked from Emily to me, then to the most unexpected thing. She reached behind her back and ripped out the tracker with a grunt of pain, tossing the bloody device onto the porch. "Run," she mouthed, shoving the teddy bear into Emily's arms. Then louder for the cameras, "You'll never get what you want, Mother, because Martha's not like us. She actually loves her family." The gunshot on the surveillance feed was deafening. The screen went black. And in that terrible silence, with Emily's whimpers against my shoulder and Lisa's blood dripping onto the hardwood, I finally understood the full scope of Carol's madness. This was never about money. It was about legacy, about poisoning the Henderson line so thoroughly that even love couldn't save it. The cabin's windows suddenly darkened as vehicles surrounded the property. But it wasn't Carol's people. The black SUVs bore the seal of the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force, and leading them was none other than Mr. Wilkinson Bank, his usual mild expression replaced by steely resolve as he shouted through a megaphone, "Carol Sinclair, you're surrounded. Release your hostages, and come out with your hands up." Carol's voice, when it came through the speakers one final time, was barely recognizable, reduced to a guttural snarl. "This isn't over, Martha. My blood runs through that child's veins, and blood always remembers." Then static. Lisa slumped against the doorframe, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The files? I sent them to everyone." Her eyes fluttered shut as the first FBI agents breached the tree line. Emily buried her face in the teddy bear's fur, her small body trembling. And on the blank surveillance screen, a single phrase appeared in glowing red letters. Game over? The FBI's raid on the cabin should have been the end of it. Carol was arrested, Richard and David were rushed to the hospital, and Emily was safely tucked into a borrowed FBI jacket. Clutching her teddy bears, agents swarmed the property. But as I sat in the back of an ambulance getting my blood pressure checked, a young agent approached with a cardboard box. Files recovered from Carol's car. Inside, beneath stacks of financial records, was a faded photograph that stopped my heart. My father standing beside a much younger Carol, their hands clasped over a newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The date scrawled on the back was 9 months before my birth. The world tilted. Carol wasn't just my enemy. She was my half-sister, which meant David wasn't just Richard's son. He was also Carol's nephew. Her revenge hadn't been about Richard's betrayal at all. It had been about the fortune our father left solely to me, cutting her out completely. And in her twisted mind, turning my own son against me was poetic justice. But the final twist came from an unexpected source. As agents led Carol to a squad car, she locked eyes with me across the chaos and mouthed, "Check the bear." Emily was still clutching that pink teddy bear Lisa had returned, the one Carol had handled personally. With trembling fingers, I pried open the stitching along its back. Inside, nestled amid the stuffing, was a tiny USB drive and a single sheet of rice paper covered in my father's distinctive handwriting. The USB contained a video, my father, frail but clear-eyed on his deathbed, confessing the truth. Carol was his illegitimate daughter, yes, but her mother had been Richard's first wife, a woman he'd abandoned when she became pregnant. I tried to make it right. My father croaked on the video, but Carol, she only inherited her mother's rage. The rice paper was even more damning. A signed confession from Carol's mother admitting she'd switched the paternity results all those years ago. Richard wasn't David's father after all. My late husband was. Carol had weaponized a lie to destroy 2 generations. The truth should have shattered me. Instead, as I watched Emily giggle with a female agent who'd given her a granola bar, I felt an eerie calm. Carol's vendetta had backfired spectacularly. In trying to poison the Henderson legacy, she'd inadvertently given me the one thing that could redeem it, an innocent child who carried none of our bitterness. 1 year later, the headlines have moved on. Carol sits in a psychiatric facility, muttering about fortunes and betrayals. Richard recovered from his injuries and quietly left the country. David, after serving 6 months for fraud, works construction under an assumed name. He sends Emily postcards she doesn't yet understand. And me? I'm too busy turning my father's contested fortune into something worthwhile. The Henderson Sinclair Foundation for Abandoned Children opened last month. Its lobby dominated by two portraits, my father and Sarah, Emily's mother, smiling as if she'd known all along how this would end. As for the pink teddy bear, it sits on Emily's bed, carefully restitched, its secrets known but never spoken of. Some legacies are better left in the past.